Hello, everybody, and welcome to the workshop about Learn Application Development in UI5 with TypeScript. And with me today here is Andreas Kunz.
Hello.
A lead architect in UI5, and we prepared a tutorial which is also available on GitHub. And this tutorial will guide you through this development process for UI5 applications with TypeScript. Before we get started with that, we do a little presentation because we want to give you some little background up front, and then we go directly into the hands-on. So at the end, what we also have seen on the keynote, it's in the meantime, we really established an end-to-end experience with TypeScript development. In this session, we will cover the creation and development part. Till now in the tutorial, we don't have the testing yet in, but maybe we can add it as a separate thing and steps on top for that. But we will use the easy UI5 generator to get started with the application that it's being created. We write then the code for the application completely in TypeScript for sure. And we will also develop custom controls, because also this is possible now with TypeScript. I missed that part in the keynote, but this will definitely be part of that session, and you will see how good that works. And we will also see live then in that session how you can consume the third-party libraries, in this case, the Chart.js library, to add some value add on top of a UI5 app. The documentation, you can also check out that later. It's on SAP GitHub.io, UI5 TypeScript. We aggregated there a lot of content. Also recently, we added one thing because some people were asking also yesterday evening about this beta flag still for the UI5 TypeScript. We collected really some arguments why it's still beta. And what it means and why this shouldn't really keep you from starting with it. Exactly. It's not a blocker, I would say. It's just that you give some background why it's like that. And yeah, then with that, Andreas, some quick words about TypeScript. So everyone has at least some basic understanding, if you have not yet. Basically, TypeScript is JavaScript plus type information. So it's the same language at its core, but there's type information on top that you can also specify in TypeScript. And this is purely a compile time, development time thing, because browsers cannot execute TypeScript natively. They only execute JavaScript, so there has to be a transpilation step. And this step basically, in most cases, just takes away the type information. For libraries like UI5 and many others that are developed in JavaScript, you can provide so-called d.ts files, type definition files, which are sort of header files that describe the API of those libraries in terms of TypeScript types and structures. So the TypeScript compiler knows what the API looks like and knows all the types in those libraries. And this is exactly what we also provide for UI5, those type definitions. On the right-hand side, you can see some examples of very plain TypeScript. So for example, in the first line, this colon number explains that the variable some number is of type number, and this means that TypeScript will not allow you to put string or boolean or whatever into this variable. If you try, then there will be an error. There's also implicit typing, so when you directly assign a number, like in the second line, then TypeScript automatically infers, well, it's a number, it has to be also this number. Same for function parameters, and of course there are more complex things, like you can define your own types, structures, and lots of complex stuff that you don't really need at the beginning, I would say, that you can like grow into generics and everything. So that becomes immediately some rocket science. Yeah, so it can get complex, but for many things, it's really just sufficient to assign some types and define some basic structures like this type point here with two number properties. And the benefits of TypeScript are that you get much more error messages much more early than doing it in JavaScript, where you often at runtime encounter some undefined is not an object or so, and then you have to go back and find out what did you wrong. So earlier error messages, better checking of what your code, also code completion, because the editor, the TypeScript compiler knows already what is every object, then can offer exactly those things that exist on this object. We will see it later and experience it. Also in-place API documentation, so no more going to the UI5 SDK documentation, switching back and forth, checking was it the text of a button or the label of a button, but it's right there in place. You just get it when you hover the button, then you see, oh, set text is label. And this is much easier and helps you developing more quickly. You can also click through, like in Java, you can click through the objects and get to the documentation, click further on. And of course, for refactoring and maintenance, it's also better when you or the reader of the code knows exactly what everything is, then it's easier to understand. And some of these benefits are noticeably immediately while you code right now, but some will only like pay off over time. So you get now to see some of the overhead as well to setting everything up. It's not much, but it's there. And this will of course pay off the longer you work. And as I said, we provide these ETS files, these type definitions for the UI5 APIs. And then there's a special thing. We thought when there's anyway a build step involved, when we anyway have to transpile TypeScript to JavaScript, then we can make use of this step to give you some other goodies. So we decided to provide these type definitions in a way that they no longer support the globals, those global SAP object with sub.m.button and so on, but only support loading the UI5 classes as real ES6 modules. So the real modern import statements are now the way how you use UI5 with TypeScript. And this is basically what we require when you use UI5 with TypeScript. Same for class definitions. You don't no longer write some class.extend, this proprietary UI5 API, but you write real JavaScript classes. This is then also in another translation step also handled, so that in the end, UI5 at runtime still gets these traditional API calls, but you at development time write in modern JavaScript.
And can I still use the old API, or will TypeScript say it's wrong?
So TypeScript will say it's wrong.
There's a question from the local audience. Can I still use these old APIs? Well, it's only about the SAP UI require and the class.extend. I'm not sure whether the require still exists. I think you can still
SAP UI require you still can use, so SAP UI define as well. Extend for sure also, but there are some APIs which are not anymore available as globals. So like what we had done in the past, that the controls are exposed to the global namespace. This will lead to issues.
But this was anyway not recommended anymore since a couple of years. You should write SAP UI require and then write your dependencies so they can be loaded asynchronously. You shouldn't write sub.m.button and just rely on the button being there because you imported the library in.
But if you start using the ES module syntax, like having the imports, you can also use the dynamic import and write that in the code, and it will also be translated then later on.
The types are available from NPM and also definitely typed, which is like the central place in the world for getting type definitions.
And maybe this is then also a bit the build pipeline part, because in the past it was like that typically you develop in the web app folder and the UI5 tooling then the work on that folder and convert that into a dist package. But with the TypeScript part, we added a pre-step upfront, which takes now the sources, the TypeScript sources from the source folder, transpiles it in the web app folder, and from there on, the tooling is working on top of that. But with having this extra step upfront, we are now able to support really this TypeScript files with the modern syntax, and then TypeScript converts them into the JavaScript format. Modern JavaScript, also imports and stuff like that was kept, but just remove the TypeScript thingies on top. And then a transpile step, this Babel plugin transform modules UI5. This is doing the rest to convert the imports into SAP UI define syntax or the classes into the object extend syntax. And by introducing that, everyone can let's say use the modern syntax for development, but at runtime it's a classic UI5 app. And this is also a pure benefit because it can also work for older runtimes then. Anything to add, Andreas? So, yeah.
But when I debug code browser, working code, this generates JavaScript code.
No. So when you debug the code in the browser, you still see the TypeScript code as well, because there's a thing called source maps, where the TypeScript compiler not only puts out the compiled, transpiled JavaScript files, but also puts out the TypeScript sources and some sort of mapping, how the commands map to the statements in the compiled code. So the browsers can use this, and when you debug, you really debug the TypeScript code it feels like you debug the TypeScript code you actually wrote.
But we will also see later the final code is not much different than the original TypeScript code. Okay, so, but now, long talked, let's get started, make our hands dirty. So the URL is github.com SAP-sample/UI5 TypeScript tutorial. So if you follow that link, this will guide you directly to this place here, this UI5 TypeScript tutorial project on GitHub. And on top right, you also see that there is the link to the SAP GitHub IO UI5 TypeScript. So there is all the documentation and the things we mentioned at the beginning, which is related to TypeScript, you can find there. So from a tutorial perspective, we say it's around, typically around 2 hours, depending on how fast you are. So you can do it also in one if you are directly going, but we want to guide you through that also with giving you some background. So therefore, we will do it like that we will now explain the exercise and you can follow the exercise afterwards. So then you get also some insights here. From requirements perspective, I hope that you already looked into that you have a current version of Node being installed and the Visual Studio Code. These 2 assets we need. And from there on, we can more or less get started. So the tutorial consists of the exercises, and from the first tutorial here, this link about getting started, you can use either this one or that one, which brings you to that page, and from there on we will start.
These steps you can do in parallel to Peter, I think, because it takes some while to
the installation, maybe you can follow it really immediately, because the Yeoman is the first thing what you need to install. So also make that, because it could be that you have an old version of the EasyUI5 generator and Yeoman, and I would suggest that you run npm install -g yo and generator EasyUI5. You can copy and paste it from the exercise 0 as a pre-step, and this makes sure that you locally have installed the recent versions of that. Because on our side, the EasyUI5 generator also gets some updates from time to time and fixes, and with that we incorporate then also a few things which have been noticed in the last sessions. There were permission problems then locally, and we fixed that. So I hope that today no one will have a permission problem running the template later on. Yeah, now I need to find another thing what I can do to bridge a bit the waiting time.
we show the next step they will have to do faster than your next.
Okay. The next step, thank you. That was sidekick. So the next step, if you have run the installation, we should validate that you use or you have the EasyUI5 generator being installed, that you can do with the command yo ---- generators. Can you read it, by the way, also in the back very well, the size of the...
Yeah.
Is it okay?
They also have the website.
They also have the website, yeah. And the EasyUI5 generator should then list in that below this EasyUI5 part. Node, npm, you know, this is the trash bin. Collects a lot of dependencies from the web, puts it on your local hard disk. Is it ready for you already in the room?
Yeah.
So maybe I continue in a new tab then. Yeah. So I don't know why. Now it's also finished. Okay. So the next part, we say then yo generators. And here in this list of the generators, you should see the EasyUI5. And if this is done, then you are already prepared properly. So then the next thing is to briefly check the version of the EasyUI5, because it should at least have the minimal version of 3.15. If you have installed it today, it's 3.4.0, which should be there for you. And with that, you should be safe that it works properly. Is it the case for you? then we go ahead. Exercise 1. Now, the interesting part. Let's kickstart an application. So we take the easy UI5 generator now to create this TS application. And if you add this TS app as a parameter for easy UI5, then it will select immediately this template. If you don't do that, then you will get a list where you can select it from a dropdown. So the first time you use it, it will download a generator and install it locally. It's taking it from the UI5 community, checking it out locally, running npm install in the background. That's how also it works with easy UI5, that it's based on these community templates. They are all fetched from GitHub if you use one. And then the npm install is called, and it's called then as a sub-generator. And now it asks you some questions. So we keep to the defaults, or stick to the defaults here, my app, my org. We use OpenUI5. In the meantime, we have the 1.103 version of OpenUI5 should be okay. The author should be you. And then just say, yes, create a new subdirectory. Because what it does now is, under the folder where you are running that right now, most probably in your user home, it will create the subfolder my org, my app, and then run npm install inside. So here we have some hints if there are problems with the permissions. That's what we found out. This should not be the case anymore, at least for the latest version of the generator, but we collected some pitfalls also on the page here. So once done, the next step is really to open the application. So you can do that with Visual Studio Code. If you install the CLI extensions for Visual Studio Code, then you can also say code colon and then the folder to open that, and then the Visual Studio Code appears. And now you should see this application in Visual Studio Code. And briefly looking into the structure, but I think Andreas will show you more details a bit later on. It consists of the package.js and the UI5 YAML. You typically know from this JavaScript application. The content, the source code is in the source folder inside. And there we have the TS files, component TS, and in the controller, you have the controller TS files. To get started with the whole project, and then I hand over more or less to Andreas, the only thing you need to do is to run npm start in the terminal. And then I just put it aside. The application should come up, and here it's German, because I have German as the language here. And it says, say hello. In your case, maybe it's English. And then if you click that, you should also be able to see this error. Are you all already on that stage, or do you need some time? Because I think this should be straightforward, these parts. Then let's go back to tutorial parts, because I think, Andreas, I'm fine. And as a summary, welcome to TypeScript. Now we get started with the details, and therefore I hand over to Andreas. I stop sharing, and you can take over.
To share. Can I see some hands? Has everybody now the app running here in the room at least?
No, should I have?
Install the generator.
Okay.
Oh.
So if you need help in the room, then Peter will come. If you need help online, talk to Martin and Oliver. For some, the installation might take a bit longer. Then please just follow the instruction on the GitHub page. Have the URL, and you will be able to catch up later, because we will explain some things where you don't need to do anything. And so I'm talking a bit to which the time for people to catch up. But basically, exercise 2 starts with not really steps that you have to do to code or so, but with steps that are more like looking at the code. This is what we are going to do right now. Peter has already opened the project. So the web app folder is the generation result. the JavaScript, the compiled one, and the source folder is where you have the TypeScript sources. So when you modify something, make sure not to go to the JavaScript files in the web app folder, but to do it in the source folder. Otherwise, it will be overwritten. Also, when you edit something, make sure you actually save your changes, because sometimes you forget this, and this is actually the most frequent cause of issues when you didn't save your changes. Just don't forget that, even though it sounds trivial. Yeah, the transpilation stuff is set up here in the Babel RC JSON, where we have this TypeScript compilation and the UI5 transformation, which is this transformation from the import statements and ES6 classes into the traditional UI5 API calls. So this is happening in a second phase in the Babel transpilation step. So they start at the bottom, and the second phase is the one at the top. Some TypeScript configuration is in the tsconfig file. I think you don't need to look into that specifically right now. Let's look at the code actually. So start with a component.js. Right there at the beginning, you see, I hope it's large enough. I increase it by one more step. You see the ES6 imports, so really the modern JavaScript module imports that are accessing the modules that we have defined in our type definition file. So UI sub/UI/core UI component, like you load the modules with sub UI require, that's the same strings here. They are now exposed to TypeScript as real JavaScript modules. Also here, this class definition is not UI component.extend, but it's class component extends UI component. That's just modern JavaScript. That's not TypeScript related also. And then below we have metadata of the component. We have some private variables, which is again class, JavaScript class notation. The init method, you know already. And there's a lot of code that is but just basically JavaScript without any TypeScript stuff. So you see it looks like you are used to it. And maybe a hint to those in the back, Peter, the microphones are everywhere. So those online can hear you as well. Then rooms next door, maybe you can.
Thank you.
So most of the code looks just like you're used to it, like with JavaScript. There's just here, for example, oh, it's a string that is returned by this function. Or, well, that's all just JavaScript. So you code it the same way as before. You just give some type information somewhere. And the result, the compilation result, actually, you can see this in the web app folder. As I said, we have the compilation result. When we open component.js there, then you see there's the traditional sub UI define, like you usually write it, and the UI component.extend with a full class name with a package including. But apart from that, the code looks more or less the same again, because it's JavaScript. TypeScript is JavaScript plus a bit more. The full namespace here. Oh, yes. Question from Tobias.
Yeah, about the namespace. I read now in the online documentation that the JS doc actually is not optional. This is mandatory.
Yeah, this is the next point I wanted to come to. So the namespace of the class.
But I have to add this namespace to each and every file.
Well, usually, I go back to the component again. Usually when you create a class in UI5, then you write it like this. So if you want to have the class inside a package with the package name of your application, then you write it like this, usually subclass.extend, and give the full package name of the class. And if you want to do the same in TypeScript, then you write it like this. You define the class just with the class name, and you give the namespace of this class in the JS document that is before that. So the transpilation can restore the full name. If you don't want the package name for some reason or so, then of course you don't have to do it. You can also say just name and give the full class name here, dot component. This is another of the files that's done like this. This is just doing it.
For simple modules, which are just like a util or so, you don't need to add the namespace. Yeah, it's useless because it's only relevant for the UI5 names.
Just when you use namespaces before, you can use them like this. So this will be really taken and put in front of the name in this transpilation step.
Why is it not derived from file structure? That this way you can make the folders different than you define the namespace.
Yeah, I mean these names are not in the file structure here. These are mapped to the current to the root directory with a set module path thing or so. Only in this mapping it said, well, my app is the local folder. So we would have to look here what is the local folder, and
That's at the end, it's one architectural decision we made very early, that there is a difference between the location of the module and the name of the module. And we have this UI5 names with the dots, but it doesn't necessarily need to map to the structure, the file structure.
So what we can also see here is that when we hover something, that we immediately see the UI5 documentation. So this get router, well, we know TypeScript knows we inherit from UI component. UI component has a method get router, and there's write the documentation. So it's since 1.16 returns the reference to the router instance, blah blah blah. So you get the UI5 documentation right there in the editor, and you can also control click, at least in VS Code, and get to the definition. So this is not going to the UI5 sources, but it's going to the type definitions that UI5 provides. They have all the documentations or the other methods on the UI component, and so on. Can click further through, so you can really browse the documentation, so to say, in line in the editor. So some of the other benefits we will see later. You can also check the chat whether there's something. And now let's go to the second part of this exercise 2, where you actually have to do some coding. And I hope those where the installation took longer are now also able to run the application, so they can proceed from here. So the first thing is that we want to load some data, and this application is going to show some COVID incidence numbers. So incidence in Germany means cases in the last 7 days per 100,000 people. So that's just a number. We measure how much COVID is going on. And we load some data from API coronaZahlen.org, and we use a JSON model for that. And I'll just start typing. It's somewhere here after the init call, for example. Const, I think it was model equals new J, and now I type J, and it already proposes different classes starting with J that are okay. So here in the room we need to see my monitor instead of this.
The sharing worked.
Yeah, for those online it's no problem, but those within the room saw the full screen. Okay, so when I start typing J, then it immediately proposes JSON list binding. JSON is like a built-in thing in JavaScript. JSON list binding, you can pick the one you want, click it, select it another way. You see the documentation again already. And as soon as you click it, not only the term is completed here, but also at the top of the file, the import is also added automatically. So you don't need to type all these imports anymore. You just type the class you want to need, and the editor automatically adds these imports. So in SAP UI require I found it always tedious to well string and the name of the object, all going now automatically. So you JSON model, and when I open the bracket again, it shows me I have to put now data, either a string or an object, and so on, gives the documentation. So it really helps me while I'm typing by reducing the amount to type, and by also proposing the things that I can enter here and showing me the documentation. I now do copy and paste, so I don't mistype too much stuff. I also recommend you just copy and paste, then we won't have issues with mistyped stuff. So we create a model against this API. It loads the data and sets the model globally on the component. So it's available everywhere in the application as default model. When we open this URL, then it's a lot of JSON. Let's just quickly format it. I have this in Notepad++. It's basically an object with a data property, and there below we have a map of German states, parts of Germany like Schleswig-Holstein, Hansestadt Hamburg, with their IDs, and then some data below, for example, the name and the week incidence, which we are going to display for each of the German states. Okay, so we loaded the data. And we saw that we have some code completion. So this is just explaining that. This is showing the data. And now we want to make use of the data. So we go to the main view XML file, make sure to go to the source, not to the web app. And there we had this hello world style thing, this message page here. And we want to replace this one with a page that is actually showing the data. So we are in the source folder, main view. And we just replace the entire message page here. Oh, actually, I should have mentioned that you don't need to do it live now, because we will, at least in the next exercises, we will first explain and you can just watch. And then we'll give you a couple of minutes to do it. If you started already, no problem.
That's why I said in the beginning, do it different, and now everyone continued.
Yeah. But I've only pasted 2 lines so far. So just replace, when I'm done here, just replace the message page with a page that that is shown in the documentation. So that's a normal document page with a grid list inside. And there are custom list items in this grid list bound to the data. So that's the German states. You will get 16 of them, 16 custom list items, just showing the name of the respective state. And I think that's it already for this exercise. No, it's not, because we have used a new library here, the SAP-F library, which is not yet used in this template application. So we have to add to the start of this XML view also the library SAP-F and also the CSS grid sub-package of the layout library. So these 2 lines need to be added somewhere in the opening tag. And also the UI5 tooling that builds everything also needs to know that the SAP-F library is now needed. So there's a line name colon SAP-F, which needs to be added to UI5.yaml. This is a file at the top level, at the very bottom of the list. There we have, close to the top, have a list of libraries that are used. Add SAP-F here, also in the UI5 dist YAML, which is used for like optimized build. Also added there. And one last thing you have to for UI5 build tools, now in manifest JSON actually. The manifest JSON, there's also a list of libraries. This is again in the web app folder and in the source folder, not in the web app folder. Make sure to the right one. There's also somewhere a list of libraries. I think so. Is it? Ah, there it is. Just add this one to around line 40, SAP-F library. Save everything if it's not done. Save all is grayed out, so everything is saved. Then you should be able to see. Maybe. Yeah.
But adding these libraries in the UI5 YAML files is actually for the UI5 tooling to go to the CDN or download them and provide them locally. And in the manifest, I add it. Exactly.
I think because, so in the manifest, the library needs to be added, I think because of your launch
Component,
pad.
no, it's a component loader. The component loader preloads these libraries then.
As about the preload, if I do not add it, it will still work. Actually.
It will still work, but it will fall back to single file loads, and this will be bad for the performance.
Okay, so actually, if I have it in the YAML, I should also add it to the manifest. But I do not have it in the manifest, I should throw out of the YAML. Is there some kind of tooling which actually keep them in the stream?
Yeah, that's what we discussed for best of UI5 to have an extension for that, which handles that. Because of that, I thought also that this is really a lazy work, and I think this can be added.
Yeah, if you have the npm start running, which is like the watch mode that automatically reloads the browser page, then you need to restart this because we changed the UI5 build tools configuration. So stop the npm start call and then restart it. But from here, I think you can keep it running for most of the time. And whatever you save will be automatically reloaded in the browser window that opens right now. And as you see, it's ugly, but it lists all the German states here. So as I have not said that you should wait in the beginning, you might have already started. I'll still give you a couple of minutes, like 3-4 minutes to redo the things, to load the JSON data, to extend the view. And maybe you here can give me a sign later on when you are done, and we assume that online it will also be done then.
Restart is necessary because of changes in UI5 YAML.
Yeah.
Yes. So restart for online, restart is needed for UI5 YAML changes. Then you need to restart the npm start.
I think everyone should be able to hear it over the microphones.
Maybe, but there's no.
Here.
Yeah.
Question in the back, yeah.
In the component TS, the intelligence for the dist object is it getting it from the extends UI component? Or?
The intelligence for the dist here is getting it from, yeah, I mean, it knows this is a class here. This class inherits from something that is known. So component that we have created here, this class has all the properties and methods of this base class. And yeah, this is this class. So this set model is really actually inherited from the base class managed object to component, the original set model.
So it's just like JavaScript.
Like JavaScript or like
Yeah.
Java?
JavaScript.
Like JavaScript, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the class definition stuff is totally standard.
Maybe one little comment again to this UI5 YAML and the UI5 tooling, because Tobias said that it's downloaded from the CDN. That's not right. It's not downloaded from the CDN. It's from the npm.js, from the npm registry. And the UI5 tooling has a custom package manager, because front-end packages are not properly supported by npm. You need to negotiate the versions that you don't have different variants of packages. And once this tooling is, or this configuration is being made in the UI5 YAML, and you start the UI5 tooling or the UI5 serve, then it will, at that point of time, download that missing npm packages from npm and install it locally. And it's also handled in an effective way. It's stored centrally per version. So you don't have then, let's say, in the node modules, always again and again, these packages for different projects. Just a little side information for you. You maybe heard it that I'm not personally a fan of this structure, how node modules are doing that. They could, if manage this more effectively, if they would share centrally the artifacts, the npm packages. Like pnpm, for example, is doing it. That is some linking.
Somebody had here a problem with npm run order is not recognized. Babel is not recognized, so I think the npm install was missing. That's what I wrote.
So if npm run all is missing, so Darren, then yeah, maybe rerun. No, the npm install -g npm run all should not be necessary, because it's a local dependency in your project. You also should not run then a global install of Babel, because typically the project will install it locally in the node modules. And yeah, and this should fix it normally. So running properly npm install in this project in the root, and then if you call npm start, everything should work properly.
Okay, so is everyone here now done who wants to be done with exercise 2? Yep. Okay, so I think we have to catch up a bit, because we were anyway delayed and now we are a bit slower than planned. So let's proceed to exercise 3 now. And we'll do it like this now. I'll really first show it and tell you some things, and then I'll be pretty quick so you cannot follow live. And then I'll give you some time so you can do the steps on your own, right? Maybe it helps when you just watch me doing it and then you do the steps. You can, of course, also proceed along with me, but then you'll have a harder time understanding everything. So exercise 3, that's not related to TypeScript. It's just adding some translation text. So that's really something you can also skip when you are slow or when you have to eat something or go to the toilet or so. So it's just making the labels a bit nicer.
Something we skipped for the keynote yesterday, just a sidekick. Tobias, and he didn't notice it.
I think somebody even tweeted about it.
Yeah, that was Tobias. Like a real demo skips.
So in the international
dates,
we have to.
Yeah.
So the button text property in the UI5con.properties file was just used for this hello world thing, and we can replace this line with the two texts we will need later on. So the English ones we paste to the default language UI5con internationalization English one, and to the German one. So we have German properties file. You can of course add with your own language abbreviation. You can other languages. To the German ones, we add Übersicht and Incidence. But this is, as I said, not related to TypeScript at all. So this is not really an important part of this tutorial. This reciters, I saved this, so the page should have reloaded. Due to the stupid toolbar, I have to move it down. So now it's Incidence Übersicht in German because my browser set to German. If you set SAP language with EN, then we get the English text at the top. Magic, you should probably know that anyway. So you have like 2 minutes to replace these texts, and then we'll continue. If you're lazy, you can just skip it. All right, almost 2 minutes are gone. Let's go to exercise 4 now. So in this exercise 4, again, I will first do the steps, and then you get some time to do it on your own. Get some more time actually this time because it's more to do. We want to add some TypeScript code, some formatter functions to the controller to display the stuff a bit nicer that we see in the main page. So there are 2 formatters we want to add to the main controller TS file. Go to the source, the main controller TS file, and add just 2 methods somewhere in the class body after the say hello method, which we can actually delete because we don't need it anymore. So replace the say hello method with format incidence and format icon color. Both get the incidence number from the respective state as input. And the first one just rounds it because there are a lot of digits after the comma or after the decimal separator. And the icon color actually maps the number to a color. So if the incidence is lower than 500, then we show it in blue. If the incidence is below 800, so between those, then it's in orange. And if it's above 800, then it will be red. And you see the icon color class or enumeration is not known here, cannot find icon color. But because we didn't import it yet, but TypeScript again knows that such a thing exists in UI5, so there's a quick fix. When you hover it in the error message, there's a quick fix shown. And when we click that, then it proposes to add an import from SAP UI core library. And this is exactly what we want to do. So just click here at the top of the file. It will add the icon color as a named import from the SAP UI core library file. So you don't have to type it on your own. And this error message is gone. Now it knows the icon color and gives some limited documentation. In some of your editors, there might be an error displayed also at the top now because we import a message box that we don't need any longer. So message box is declared, but its value is never read. This could even come up as an error when you have set up ESLint automatically to check everything. Of course, we can delete this line. Just one small thing I want to show is that we can run this ESLint. So ESLint is basically a code checker. And And the ESLint is already set up in this application template to check the code. You can see it in package.json as dependency, and also one of the scripts. The lint script is set up to run ESLint on the sources, so to check the sources. And if you say npm run ESLint, it looks a bit weird now here, but yeah, the script is named lint, npm run lint, then this code check will run and check the application code. So depending on the linting rules you have set, you can pause a certain formatting style. And here we get this warning that message box is not defined. Later on, you will also get an error, an interim step there that might also show up in your code editor, but you shouldn't let yourself be disturbed by that. All right, so we added the two formatters to the main controller. And the next thing we want to do is now part two. We want to show this incidence number, so we have again to add a library to the main view XML. Just somewhere in the opening tag, add the core library. Then we can use the icon control, which is coming from the core. First, we want to add some content padding to the grid list control, so the states don't reach out to the very edges of the grid list. And then we extend the custom list item with mainly some formatting stuff, which is not so important to explain right now, but also with the icon that is bound to the weak incidence and uses this formatter that transforms the number to the color that defined for the respective incidence. So the icon color will change with the incidence, and the name of the state is now shown here as title, and the weak incidence itself is shown in the object number. So when we save that, hope I did not. Oh, I stopped the npm start, so this is why it's not refreshing. So now the overview will look a bit nicer with an icon that depends on the incidence and also the incidence number shown. And I think that's it for the exercise 4. Yep. But you basically mostly saw that you can get this automatic import via quick fix when you use something that is not known yet. And you can now do the exercise 4 if you haven't done yet. We give you like 4 to 5 minutes. It should be possible, 4 minutes.
There was also a question on the chat. I think maybe that's also something what you can also maybe answer. I'm looking for an answer right now. The question from Dimitar is, one ESLint rule I find hard to abide, no explicit any. It does make sense not to turn off the type system, but for this less typecasts are required. Yeah. And is it planned to reduce typecasts? I think that I don't remember anymore where exactly this came in and why we added it. It was more or less most probably about these generic APIs, which returns more the general types, and you need to cast it to the specific types, then like the by ID or something.
Yeah, but
Otherwise,
they don't need the cast to any.
Where was this exactly? Do you remember?
Not really.
Yeah, we have to follow up on that, Dimitar. So I out of my mind, I don't know right now these spots.
Actually, so far we don't have any typecast. There will be some later, but you can cast without. Let's go to chat again. So less typecasts are required when you type something as any. Depends on which typecast you mean, actually. So often when you say some control get call by ID or so, then you get a control back. Of course, you get a button control back or a page control back, and you know exactly what it is because you know the ID and what you exactly requested. But our API just returns control. So you often have to cast this in TypeScript to the specific control when you want to access some properties of that control. This is hard to get rid of for those generic APIs. Somebody have already in GitHub issues proposed that we use generics, that we make this by ID a generic function, and also others like getModel or so. But then you have to specify the type in the call of the method, so to say. And this is, according to Microsoft, the owners of TypeScript, this is like a typecast in disguise or so. So this is something they don't want to see. Generics just to avoid the casting later on, writing the type before the method call. This is not what generics are meant for, according to Microsoft. So we hesitated implementing this. But
yeah. The other question is more a general one about the types, the names for the routes.
Well, maybe we didn't obey all the rules there. No. That could be.
No, I think there is no governance on that. So you can write it lowercase or Pascal case or kebab case or whatever. I think there is only some restriction on which characters you are allowed to be used. There is a regular expression behind that. When you use the editor in VS Code, then there is a schema which also verifies that behind the scenes.
So I think we have to, I didn't write down the time, but I hope everyone is done with exercise 4. Can proceed to exercise 5. Anyone needs more time in the room or online? Chat.
Feedback?
Let's start then with anything.
Okay.
Should I go faster, slower?
Looks good.
Nobody has an opinion.
No, there was some feedback coming in.
Okay, then. Okay, exercise 5 now. Again, I'll do it first, and then you have some time to do it. Now we want to create a second view where we display the details, the history details, and later on we'll end up with a chart there. For the state you select in the main view, and then you navigate there. So we need to do some routing first. In the routing route section, we need to add the incidence detail route. I just copy here from the second code the entire routes block, so there's no error by forgetting a comma or so. Just copy the entire routes block. This is also not TypeScript related, so you don't miss learning anything here. I can do it in the right one, not in the source folder, but in the not in the web folder, but in the source folder. Quite at the bottom, we have the routes, and we add one more route that has the URL hash pattern state slash and then the ID of the German state. And then the router will navigate to the second page if it encounters this hash. So the target is the incidence detail target.
That's where the question also came from, why we have the one lowercase and the others in the Pascal case.
Yeah, it's about those here.
Yeah.
Okay. Our error. I'm not sure what the guideline is if we have one. I'm not sure whether we have one.
No, there is no. But I think we named it just like the view, and the main view we just wrote lowercase.
No, the main views.
No, but here in the route.
Okay, so we create now the incidence detail view, which is the target of this route, which is second page basically. And to do that, we go to the source view directory and make sure it's in the right directory, create a file incidence detail.view.xml. Create a very basic view with not a lot of content. Just a page that says TBD. The nav button is this back button, and on nav back is a method that is actually already available in this application in the base controller, because the base controller comes with some functionality already. this template, so it already does this history stuff. You just call nav back, and then the space method will do what is needed. And we also need a controller for this view. It's not doing anything yet, but this will come later on. So create in the controller directory an incidence detail controller TS file. Make sure it's TS. Don't write JS just because you're used to it. With more or less empty content. Been done in this modern JavaScript style. And now we also need to navigate from the main view to this detail view. So we add to the main view XML a press handler to the grid list. So when some grid list item is clicked, then we navigate to the respective to the detail page with the respective data of the state. So we just add this press one. Main view. To the custom list item, actually, just add this press handler. And now we have to implement this method. This is not in the base controller. And after incidence detail, in the main controller, we add this implementation here. Just another method in the class body. After incidence detail, where we get the UI5 event and then extract the state ID from the control that was clicked from the custom list item in the data context. You can get the binding context, get a property abbreviation, which is the ID of the state. And here we do, for example, some casting. This is a typecast because TypeScript, no, it's TypeScript stuff again. TypeScript doesn't know what the model structure is, what the types in the model are. And so when we get the abbreviation, it could be a number or anything. So we cast this to a string. So it's clear to TypeScript. Also in the beginning, the event source is an event provider in UI5. It does not need to control it element or something else. So we cast it to control here. Okay, but then now there's a problem here. So what's the problem here? Get source does not exist on event. Well, you have used UI5 events already. Get source does exist on event. So what's the point here? And this is now something to learn about TypeScript again. What's the event? Well, event is an event that takes place in the DOM. Well, DOM. So that's actually the built-in knowledge of TypeScript about browser APIs, about the browser DOM. So this is not the UI5 event, actually. This is the DOM event. And of course, it has no UI5 specific stuff on it. So basically, TypeScript thought, well, it sounds like event. It should be a browser event, but it's not. This is why we have to tell TypeScript, well, this is actually the UI5 event. And this is something we can do by just adding this import line to the top. I could also have written UI5 event, and then it would have said, oh, I don't know that. What is that? I'm not sure whether a quick fix would find it because UI5 event is not a class in UI5. But basically, we import now the SAP UI base event module from UI5, type and assign it to the name event. So TypeScript knows, okay, here in this class, event is not the browser event, but it's the UI5 event. We, so to say, overshadow it. And now when we go back down here and hover the event, then it's really saying, okay, that's the UI5 stuff. And now get source also exists.
If you press control space at the end of the word, then it gives you a list of other classes which are matching, and you can choose one.
Okay. That's something I...
And you can auto import it also.
So here, control space. Okay, great help. Thanks, Michael. Okay, for everyone. When something like this occurs, you don't have to manually type the right import. It took the wrong one, but if you press control space at the end, then it gives you the list of alternatives that it could also be. Now, this is the DOM event, apparently, with bubbling and capturing, but if you go one down, then it's a jQuery event. No, that's also not what we want. it's the UI5 event, and if I click here, I guess it will do the import automatically at the top. Yeah, there it is. Thanks, Martin. Right, and the only thing that is left is that controller has not been imported yet. The quick fix will import it right from the place where it should be imported from. And I think that's it. And yep, you can now navigate back and forth. Can click state and go to the detail page, can go back again, and so on. So this was exercise 5, and you will get quite some time, like 10 minutes to do this, but we'll ask in between when everyone is ready, we can start with it. So 10 minutes until 12:03 to do exercise 5. No question.
The say hello function was declared as public. The other ones we added now are not. Are they then declared private or protected? What's the default for TypeScript?
Good question. So the original method say hello was public. Now we didn't do anything here like saying it is public or not. I think we haven't really made up our mind about what we should do here, because I mean at runtime it's just the way it just works. This is an area where that's not really defined, because these methods are called from the XML view, so to say. Is this XML view now like part of the class? It's not in the same class, but it's not a class at all. Is public the right thing? I don't think that somebody from completely somewhere else should call this method, because it's meant only for the view. Should it be then protected maybe, or what are the keywords exactly? It's just not really well defined right now how it's called from some other places like an XML view. I don't know. I also don't know actually what the default is. TypeScript probably is something like protected. If somebody knows, you can chime in. I would not make it public, because it doesn't feel like a public API of this controller. So this is why we omitted it. Okay, there's an interesting question from Dimitar in the chat. So all the TypeScript support seems to rely on the package from GitHub from Ryan Murphy, Babel plugin transform modules UI5. And whether we like want to move it to SAP, or because this is an external library, is it reliable enough, and so on. And the background here is we have talked to Ryan Murphy already about this. We have been talking to him that we are using this as a part of our transpilation. Actually, the TypeScript transpilation itself is just using the Babel TypeScript plugin. It's not using this package from Ryan Murphy, but the transformation from this modern JavaScript classes and modules to the traditional UI5 syntax, that is actually using this transformation. So it's one step of the 2 steps transformation. And we have talked to him, and he wasn't like, yeah, take it over, I'm not planning anything with it. He was more like, well, I developed it and we were fine with it. So for the time being, I mean, we are using many open source modules in UI5. So why shouldn't we use this one? We're benefiting from it. We have already done improvements there and put pull requests, and we took them over. But we keep it in mind that this might be a thing we might want to fork if things don't go so well. So it hasn't been updated for a while now, that's true, Dimitar, but it works as it does right now. If there are issues and we don't get them solved quickly, then we might want to fork that repository. But now we don't see the need.
Yeah.
Does anyone need more time now, or can I proceed? Anything in the chat? So those errors in the chat we try to take care of.
Is there some issue with the TS config or so? But
Yes.
most probably if there is error and it cannot read, it sometimes indicates with the TS config an error.
Cannot find type definition file for node modules.
But this is also something I have I haven't really investigated what this says, but
You only haven't opened up your application folder as the root folder in your Visual Studio Code.
That
okay, but
could happen, but in the meantime, this
have.
became also a bit better. Can you, Andreas, can you maybe go briefly in the TS config file
It's here.
here? What you can also try to do, you can also use types with that open UI5/types with TSM. Maybe if you remove that from type roots.
Well, yeah.
They don't need to do it now. Maybe I'll show it later. No, not this one. You keep the types you need to keep, but the second one, the OpenUI5 types, can go also to types in a separate. I just saw that also in another project recently.
No.
You need to remove.
Ach man.
Just put it in quotes, double quotes, the types.
Yeah. Also, that's right.
And the comma after the types you need to remove. The one in line 17 at the end. Yeah, it's JSON.
But this doesn't change a thing. I think we have to follow up with that
It's
later.
done.
Oh, now it's done.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
something I
but
just recently saw, and maybe that's also one thing you can follow up. That you move the OpenUI5 TS types ESM into the type section. We can adopt it also.
So we have to explicitly point to this one because TypeScript only looks automatically at add type/something, and here we have currently the OpenUI5 types from the OpenUI5 namespace. We also publish them at definitely types. So you can say add type/OpenUI5. Then you wouldn't even need this line or this section. But for the SAP UI5 types, they are not at definitely typed. So they are only in the add SAP UI5 namespace available. And so this is why we kept it in this way also for the example. But I'm not sure whether this fixes the error.
Yes, it fixed yours.
Yeah, this one, but not at every file.
Check it out.
Chat again. Ja, die sagen von jeder Datei haben sie.
Yes, but maybe this is related to that.
Okay, everyone was ready and we are going.
Is there one in the room with having the same issue? Is it you?
The changing to types solved it for me in the scope.
Look at that.
Okay.
Sometimes you need to believe me.
All right, so let's go to exercise 6. Again, I will do steps first, and then you get some time to redo it. Now we have this detail page, and we don't display anything there yet. This is why we want to load some history data, COVID history data to display in this detail page and later on to show in the custom control. But right now we just want to load it. So in the incidence detail controller, we want to add two methods, which are doing what I'll explain in a second. So far, there wasn't anything in this class. Now we are adding something and can do some quick fixes again, thanks to TypeScript. So we import the JSONModel and import the UI component. And all these imports will again be done automatically. At the bottom, we see again, well, the event is taking the wrong one by default. We say control space and pick the SAP UI base event here. So we get the right one. Now the errors are all done. So the init method, when the controller is created, we go to JSONModel, this time from a slightly different subpart of that API. I'll open it in a second to see the data, and set this model with the name incidence history on this detail view. And then we register a route handler on the routing. So we call onRoute matched whenever the incidence detail route. So whenever we navigate to the detail page, then this method here at the bottom is called by the router. And it gets also the ID from the router, because the ID is, if you remember the routing configuration, slash or states slash the ID of the German state is in the routing pattern in curly braces, which means, as it manifest? which means this is parameter that we can just get. And so we will be informed by the router about which German state is it where we are now going. So we get basically the ID of the state we are going to display on the detail page, and pick from the data structure the right subsection and set it as model on this detail page. So let's have a brief look at the data so you see what is going to be used here. So that's a lot of data now because we have now the past 100 days of COVID incidents in Germany for each state. At the top, we have the data root and then the data node, and then we have the ID of the state. And this is then the object we will assign to the JSON model for the state we navigate to. So we have here the name, for example, and the history. And the history is a list of data points for every day. And this is what we will make use of the chart later on. So on init, we load the data and we set up the router that we will point the data model always to the right section that corresponds to the state we want to display. So here again, depending on your environment, you might get an error message, a linting error. I think we can just ignore it. You can define, this is now explained in the documentation here, but you can skip this actually. You can define your custom type, which is also a nice exercise for using UI5 with TypeScript. The custom type that explains that there's actually a string coming back, and then you can ask for arguments and something. But this is something that we would like to skip for now, in the interest of time. So we go to the UXML and just make sure we display the title from the data that we have loaded. So this is not displaying any of the actual data yet, just the title. But just to make sure that it's working, we say title equals not TBD, but the incidence history, that's the name of the model we have assigned, and the name of the state we are currently displaying. I also didn't save this one here, so save this one. And you should see now, right, we have already the hash states Schleswig-Holstein SH, so it's already displaying the correct one. If you go back, you can go to any of the states and we see the title here, and this means we know that also the data is available for the next exercise. But basically exercise 6 is hereby done, and you get like 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, I'll check.
I fixed the generator already that it moves the types to the types, because I think it should be useful for all the others doing it again.
Okay.
Not have it there. But we need to update our tutorial. I created an issue.
Okay, you have now 5 minutes to do exercise 6 if you haven't done it yet. Until 12:13 or so. But before that, I'll ask around whether everyone is already done. The next exercise, then exercise 7, will be the last one I'll do. Then we will create a custom control displaying all this data, first as plain text, and then Peter will continue in the probably last exercise with loading a third-party charting library to make this custom control chart control that displays the data in a graphical way. Yep. So that's the 2 things that are now remaining, and maybe also arguably the more interesting exercises, because custom control development and third-party embedding, both in TypeScript, is coming with some specifics, so there's something to learn there as well. Yeah. Who needs more time? Show me your hands. Nobody? Okay. Then let's continue with exercise 7, the last exercise for my voice today. No, not the last, to stage with water. Okay. Now we will create a custom control in TypeScript. And there's first some work to do. We'll go straight to creating the control files. Actually, we'll create one control, which is the chart control. plus one element, which is like a base class of control in UI5, just for holding the data of the single days, so the chart records. So we'll have one chart control that aggregates many chart records for the single days. Let's first create the control file next to the control directory, next to the controller directory. So make sure to do it in the right place now. So right-click the source file, source folder, control, and it should show up next to the controller folder. Otherwise, you will get some strange errors later on when you put it to the wrong location. And inside this new control directory, create chart record TS. That's first this element holding the single data points. Right-click this folder, new file, chart record. So this should be now source, control, chart record TS. Again, you will get some time later on, so you can really follow me if you want to do it on your own later, and listen now. And the content of this element is just a very simple UI5 element named chart record that has two properties: the label, which is string, and the value, the incidence value of this day, actually, which is a float. And so this is pure standard UI5. Then we have this import statement and the class definition. That's also standard, like the new JavaScript that we propose or enforce with TypeScript. We have also the namespace, or actually now the full name here, so that generation creates the right thing in the end. So when we say control development in Java in TypeScript, then there's first of all nothing really special. This is what you already know from the controllers and from the component. The metadata is also something we have already in the component. It's now here static read-only metadata. This is where you specify your control metadata. So initially, that's not really much that is really special or unexpected. There's one thing at the end that we'll see, but apart from that, it should be straightforward, actually, the control development. You can also have a look at the generation result. Now I'm getting the better folder. Control, and the reciting control is like you would have expected with the SAP UI define and UI5 element extend, because we inherit from the element, not from control with the metadata. So that's a really plain standard UI5 control. And also the TypeScript is not really surprising to what you write there. Just you have to know that you write the metadata as a static read-only member. Then we create the other one, the real control, the chart control, that is doing a bit more stuff because it has to render a chart. Now make sure to be in the control folder inside source again. The file is LineChart.js and the content is like this. That's a bit more, but I'll go over it in a second.
We should prepare a snippet file to be imported in VS Code.
Okay, so the overall frame is the same as for the other one, for the chart record. We have the imports on the new JavaScript style. We have the class definition. We inherit from control here, really. We have the metadata. So we have a title and a color property for this chart control. And the records aggregation, which aggregates the chart records, the single data points of the charts. Then we have a renderer. So we have it here inside the file, using API version 2. So please use at least API version 2 if you're not doing so. The old string-based rendering is not as efficient. Use the open start. Oh my God. Sometimes VS Code gets really in your way. So open start, open end to create the starting tag, just the div right now. And the closing of this div tag is here. And inside of the div tag, we get all the chart records, and for each chart record, we just write the HTML right now. This unsafe HTML means it's not escaped. So cross-site scripting could be in danger here, but we know the value of the chart record is of type float. So UI5 makes sure it's always a float. It cannot be some evil script, so we can use this unsafe HTML. and ignore this error message for the time being. This is the thing that is a bit special about control development in TypeScript. This is something we will have a look at later. So right now, this custom control just prints out separated by line. Hello? Okay. This just prints out a long list of numbers of the single day data, incidence data, separated by line breaks. The chart stuff, the magic will be done by Peter later in the next exercise. Is this already everything? I think so. We'll have a look at the reciting app. Does it work already? What?
Did you save properly?
Did I save?
Is the server running?
Yes, I saved. The server is running.
Sure.
Maybe it's maybe I missed something.
You should
brain is not.
view to the
Yeah, we should add the control to the view to see it. That's a good idea. That's somebody who is paying attention. Yeah, that's actually the next exercise. Of course, we should add the control to the view. That's
That
some
was
stuff you can easily
you
forget.
made a joke by intention, or
Yeah, of
you
course.
wanted to check that everyone is still alive.
Absolutely. Of course, I knew it all the time. Okay, so let's go to the incidence detail view now. And just replace the entire content, and I'll tell you what is different now. The first thing is we have to add an XML namespace for this custom control namespace here for my app control. Just call it, for example, CC. And then we add this CC line chart as content of the page. CC. And the line chart has a title property. There we again bring up the name of the state. The color we set red. Red is a legal CSS color. And the records aggregation we bind to the history. You remember in the data, it was a long list of data sets. So we get one chart record for each data point, and we'll bind their label and value to the date and the current incidence of that date. If you now save this one, could be more lucky. And see actually a long list of red incidence values, 100 incidence values. Yeah, it's ugly, but you are here to make it nicer.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's a pretty trivial control, just putting out some values as simple strings into the HTML. It works. And there was nothing really special about it so far, but there are still those errors. Let's have a look at them now. So chart get color. And TypeScript says get color does not exist on type LineChart. Chart get records. Get records does not exist on type LineChart. And property means also it could be a method. So everything is a property for TypeScript. So it says there's no get records, there's no get color. But of course we know, well, there is the aggregation records. So we definitely have a get records function and it works at runtime. So what is wrong here? Yeah, TypeScript doesn't know about these methods because UI5 generates these accessor methods for the properties and for the aggregations at runtime only. So while you are typing here, those methods like get records, add record, and so on, they do not exist for TypeScript. They are not written here anywhere, so TypeScript doesn't know about them. This is, of course, like TypeScript rightly complains. And what's the solution for that? Well, we provided a small tool also available via NPM that knows about these metadata and about these methods that UI5 generates. It just generates like a type definition file that contains all these methods that will be available at runtime. So to for this tool, let's go to the instructions again. Tool has the npm name at UI5 TS interface generator, and can just install this as a dev dependency. It only needs to run while coding, not at runtime. So this is installing the dependency. It's a floating tool. And we can call this tool then with npx, so start from the npm node modules folder, this tool, and it has a watch mode. So it means it starts and it keeps running, and whenever you change something, then it will just run again and update the type definition. So this is something you can keep running while you are extending your control API, but you don't usually need it running later on. So it's something you can also run after you have defined all the control metadata, just run it once without the watch mode. And then it will just do its job, and then it's done again. Okay, first it will have to scan all the type definitions, actually also of UI5 and of the application here, and it will go over all the files. And then first thing you notice is these errors are gone. Get color, no error anymore, and it knows the TypeScript shows here is something is here, it returns a string. Well, okay, CSS type. And you can control click, and then you end up in this file, LineChart.gen.ts, which is actually now just lying next to the LineChart control. So this tool generates just an additional file next to the original control file, which contains all the getters and setters for the properties and aggregations, and also for the events, so attach event handler, blah, blah, blah. All these methods are specified here. There's no implementation, of course, but it's written in a way that TypeScript knows these things exist, what types they have, what they return. And this file is created in a way that the TypeScript merges somehow the content with the actual control class. So it doesn't mess around with your actual code in the control class, but it's a file next to it. But it's by TypeScript, it's merged, so to say, into your class. There's also a definition for the constructor. So when you get new LineChart control, then you can also give some initialization properties. So the typing is also specified here, which properties are added to the standard control settings. And yeah, because this exists now, TypeScript is happy and doesn't display any errors anymore. And this is the thing that is special about TypeScript control development, that you need this tool. Otherwise, you would have to specify all these methods by hand. This is something
I think you mentioned it that normally we create it at runtime. Yeah, that's functional.
So UI5 creates exactly this at runtime, so to say, in JavaScript, but TypeScript doesn't know. No. There's one more thing, the constructors, which are getting these properties here, like title, color, you can also give in the constructor. The constructors cannot be added in this way, in a separate file. This can only happen in the real file.
You can also zoom out a bit, was feedback from
zoom out
from the Zoom audience. So yeah. I think one should, that's okay.
Okay, so the tool has some output here that says there's a, I will remove this one and rerun the tool. Well, I just do a modification. Then the tool will rerun itself. Something's broken.
Maybe you.
Maybe me?
No, maybe you start a console crash or so.
So I just want to have a look at the output of the tool. It mentions that you have to put some block of code, just 3 lines of code, into your real controller. So also the constructor knows about these additional properties.
You need to scroll up.
Yeah, it has already done the job. So for the LineChart.js, for example, you need to add these files because we don't want to mess with your original source code. You need to put these lines to the LineChart. Is it the LineChart? Just add it somewhere. And this defines the additional constructor signatures when you give the ID or only the settings object, and uses this LineChart setting that has been defined in the other file. So basically, just keep in mind, for every control, you once need to get this output, paste it here, and you never have to touch it again, because the LineChart settings, if you add more properties, then this type will be extended. Just put it there and leave it alone, and the tool will automatically notice it's there and will no longer point you in the output to adding it. Yeah. Question?
Yeah, and just to understand it. Normally in JavaScript, this get title, get colors, and so on was created on the fly.
At runtime, yeah.
One time was pretty easy. Now I have to do this additional step for the compiler to actually
Yes.
be able to understand when he compiles it to JavaScript, the TypeScript, that is not failing.
Yeah, so when you don't, so we generate these types really just that the compiler knows these methods exist. So the compiler otherwise would, as we have seen, there were error messages, get color does not exist. And the compilation would then not succeed, or actually it does succeed, but you still get an error message. So the application was running, the JavaScript was created, but still you get these error messages you don't want to have. You don't get type safety for the get
Okay, but
coloring.
if I don't create them, the compiler is still able to create the JavaScript like and run the app.
Actually, it does, yeah. Even
Okay,
with
but
the error
this
message, so TypeScript sometimes provides output even when there's actually an error, because the reciting JavaScript doesn't change whether it knows this method or not. The JavaScript is the same.
You can
it does not influence the recite.
But this is
It's just instance check.
the benefits is actually that my compiler is happy when I write some coding. I get all the nice TypeScript benefits.
Yeah, I think
But
also
in
from
the UI5 application, it's optional.
Yes. So TypeScript. So also the type checks that you write that are done by the compiler are really only done at compilation time. They are no checks that dynamically run at runtime. All the type checking of TypeScript is then just done. So then if you get some data from somewhere and cast it to something, so then bad things will not be avoided by TypeScript. So it only checks while you develop whether everything is right, and it gives you, of course, benefits like code completion and so on, and type checking.
and semantics checks, yeah, that it is properly done. There is also one question about automating this step, because we discussed it also while implementing that. What do we do with the constructor configurations, because they can't be put into the interface?
Yeah, so these 3 lines that I have had to put into the line chart here, and we have thought about whether we should just go into your code and modify your code that you're currently developing, so to say. But we thought, well, it's not a good idea when you really just have already modified the file but not saved yet. Then we are saving a file that you have already modified. How is this going to be merged? So right now we don't want to mess with the file that you are developing. We only want to touch the gen.ts, DTS files.
If someone has an idea how we can also put it maybe in from the side, this would be also a nice hint.
So in TypeScript itself, there are issue reports open for a long time that also the constructor should be able to be extended like this. Also, but this is just a gap in TypeScript, so to say.
I have the DTS file, but I still get the errors, and I also have errors in generated file. I don't know what's wrong.
Okay, we'll come to you, but everyone else, please just do the exercise now. Actually, you have also done it. So who hasn't started yet, do the exercise 7 and try to be done in like 5 to 7 minutes, Peter.
Yeah, we have till 45 and then we need to end. So by the next step, maybe we can do also that way that I show it, and you can also follow up later on that.
Try to get the controls done in 5 minutes.
I think it's a nice and
up to you,
interesting step, the exercise 8, because you have seen that maybe also on the keynote when you have listened to that. Yeah, we have already UI5 libraries with some custom controls in JavaScript. Can we use them in TypeScript based on UI5 application, or do we have to move the lib to TS? Yeah, internally, we are using the JS doc generation to generate the type definitions, and we are also working on making this available. It's not yet available, so we need to update this UI5 generator, but this is one of our plans. And then you can also have and use classic UI5 libraries written in JavaScript with having hopefully proper JS doc, because this is the basis for the whole thing. And then with the JS doc, we can use the JS doc generator to create the API JSONs, and based on the API JSONs, the TypeScript generator, we create type definitions. I hope that answers the question of MR. Okay, so in exercise 8, it's about using NPM packages, because in the past it was quite a challenge to use NPM packages. You had to copy them in your projects, and you had to do configurations for that. Then with the UI5 tooling, you could more or less have dependencies for that already in your package JSON, but then you need to configure shims for that, which makes it possible that, let's say, these libraries which are available then as a node module then are properly mapped into a namespace of UI5. And there was then also some idea coming up then while doing one or the other project for a TechEd that this should become much easier, because it's going wild that if you do TypeScript development and then you have to do some strange shimming, then you have a namespace and don't get automatically code completion. So at the end, it's really hard then to get the benefit of the third-party library and also via TypeScript development. And therefore, we developed then a custom middleware and a custom task, the UI5 tooling modules. And with that, it's possible that we can integrate most of the open source libraries, which are client-side libraries. So that's a precondition, because if that's a node module for the server side, then most probably has some limitation that it requires these APIs. But things like Chart.js, which is built for the client, you can then simply add as a dependency to your project, and then you can import it for your project. So this may be one thing to add. It doesn't only necessarily work for TypeScript. That was maybe the starter for the idea. It also works for pure UI5 JavaScript. So you can also use the tooling modules with classic UI5 applications. Then you can write it as a dependency inside. But just to let you know that this is not necessarily coupled to that. So in order to get started, to be able to consume these third-party packages, you need to install this UI5 tooling modules. So this is what we do. In the keynote you saw, it's already, in the meantime, there are other opportunities, maybe better opportunities for that available with this ECUI5 generator. Maybe we can also enhance it, but this is also quite fresh, and there will be also later a session from Jakob explaining that. So let's stop your server, and then we install the tooling modules to that. This should go quick. So after installing the tooling modules as a dev dependency now, we need to configure it. So configuring means first in the package JSON, we need to add it here in the UI5 dependency section that the UI5 tooling finds it. So please go into the package JSON, and in the package JSON, it's added as a dev dependency, but it needs to be added as a UI5 dependency. This is also something to be changed in the future with a maybe next major version of the tooling. Then this also becomes obsolete. And then after having it inside the package JSON, you need to also enhance the UI5 YAML to add the custom middleware and also the custom task, because it can be used for development scenario with a middleware, and with a task you can use it then for the build time that you copies then also this third-party package in your dist directory. So having done that, that's the thing for the server. Then we can restart the server again, npm start. The UI5 tooling modules is now available. And you could potentially access then the third party, but I missed one thing. I was a bit too quick because I didn't follow properly my step. We need for sure also to add the dependency to a third party library we can use. So the next step, we add the Chart.js. Let me go there. Stopping the server again. Chart.js. Also as a dev dependency is okay. And then we call npm start. And finally, everything should be available. Also, keep in mind, you don't need to add the Chart.js now into this UI5 dependency section, because the UI5 tooling modules is not related to this section here. So, and The next step is now that we change this into a nice looking chart, what we have here on this detail page. And Andreas prepared the controls in a way that we can use that to integrate a chart there. To just briefly show to you how that works with the lookup of the Chart.js, you can, for example, enter a URL like resources / and then Chart.js is the name of the module, and it needs to have a .js extension. If you do that, the lookup happens, and that's the outcome of that. So it transpiles the Chart.js library, which is any kind of a module, AMD, Common.js, whatever, into a UI5 AMD-like module. And that's also the trick where you don't need any registration for that. And then you can directly use that at runtime as a simple dependency in your project. And this is then also the trick, then more or less, if you then go into the exercise again, how to use it in the project. Because now what I want to do is I want to really import that. And in TypeScript, in order to get the code completion, the import should look like how others do that in a way that it's then pointing to the npm package. So here it can find it, I can go there, and it finds also the type definitions for that. And here, this is now the chart, it's available here. I get also fully the code completion for that. And this is possible because just of this name here. So now let's edit quickly. So do the coding part. We have a private member for that. To keep the reference to the chart. And then we need a function to create the chart data. So I just briefly also explained it after putting it inside. So having the chart data here, I iterate through the records, my elements here, and I create then an object, which is the data structure Chart.js expects that we have labels and mapping here the labels from the records. And then the data sets are the data points from the records here. And then I also put the color inside the background color and the border color and the title to the label of the data set overall. So this is the object for Chart.js. And the next thing now is how to render that. And now we need to modify the renderer a bit, that we put here the canvas in the renderer at the place where we have this for each. So instead of iterating through that and writing these ugly lines, we now create a placeholder for the Chart.js. And here in this placeholder, Chart.js will finally render the chart inside. So it's a bit like normally how you put in external thing, so the control takes over the life cycle, and now it renders a placeholder. And at a later point of time, when the control is being there, the DOM is ready, you use the lifecycle hooks for the rendering to add these nested controls. And where do we have it? Going a bit down. The on after rendering now here. This is the lifecycle hook we need to add. And in the on after rendering function, we look whether the chart has already been created. If not, we create a new chart instance. And then we grab the DOM ref, so this canvas. This is a function of the UI5 control to retrieve a DOM ref with a suffix. And if we look a bit down to the renderer, we rendered this canvas with the ID of the chart and the suffix canvas. And then this can be used very easy in the lookup here in the on after rendering by this get DOM ref function. We convert that in the HTML canvas element, so Chart.js is expecting that. And then we say type LineChart, retrieving the chart data, and say, yes, it's responsive. So if you resize the chart, then it's then automatically also adapting. And if it's already being rendered, so in later times when updates happen, then the else part is just applying the chart data to the chart and updating the chart. So that's it. If I did nothing wrong, I need to move that out, hide, where is this, floating data? Then I should be able to see a proper chart. Hooray. And yeah, that's basically it. What I wanted to show from that exercise here, from this exercise 8. because it shows really how simple it is now to consume a third-party library. It's not different than in any other framework also as well. And the magic happens with this module, with this middleware and this task, which does the transpiling of the module into a UI5 module. And then you just consume it at runtime. If you look into the UI5 code, and maybe as a last thing to add here, which is being generated in the web app folder, and that's also the way why I say it's also usable for the for regular JavaScript-based UI5 application, this middleware, because at the end here, this dependency, you can also write it in sub UI defined syntax. Chart.js/auto, and then from that on, you can also access then the internals from the chart as well. So here, this is some boilerplate code generated by a translation, but here you get this back. And I think that's really the point. We need to also move the development experience in a way that it looks like also how others do that. And that's what we do with the TypeScript part here as well, having the possibilities of the ES modules and the classes on top. And with that, it looks, I think, really straightforward and also modern and fresh how to develop UI5 applications with TypeScript. Yeah, last but not least, there is you can follow that now. We are a bit over time. We have 2 minutes overtime now.
At least on the delay that we had in the beginning, but maybe you can quickly explain what the last exercise would be about. And then
that was my plan. That was my plan. So the last exercise, if we go now to the last thing, then it's about beautifying the chart a bit. So here in this case, you will also see how to use formatters then to do some properly formatting of the dates below the chart and stuff like that. It also shows that how you can use that then together with a code completion provided by the TypeScript for the formatters, how to get that in. And I think basically
there's nothing really new about TypeScript in UI5 to learn. It's just making it a bit nicer, rounding off everything.
It shows different variants of formatting, more or less. Yeah. And basically, that's it for the TypeScript demo. So now, next thing we said in the beginning, we need to incorporate now the testing as a last thing here as well. But then it's really a complete tutorial for getting started with TypeScript and UI5.
So I think we'll be around for some time to help people who are now doing these steps. There's one question online. Why is the import from Chart.js/auto? And I think this auto is a specific thing from Chart.js.
It came recently, normally in the beginning, Chart.js was just okay with having a direct import, but they changed a little bit the internals that they say you need to now require submodules there. You get also this completion here, and this auto is providing a bundle, a specific bundle, which is completely pre-configured. If you just import Chart.js, you in the meantime need to add a lot of additional steps. So I had it in one example in the a while back. I don't have it quickly out of my mind, but you can also use it that way. But then you need to configure Chart.js even more. That's not possible.
The point is this looks a bit strange, but this is not related to UI5. This is not related to TypeScript. This is just how Chart.js exposed their bundle. So other libraries would be just like import something.
But it's like any other library. If you include a sub package, you can, for example, import Axios or so in a way like that, if you have it as a dependency. And if you want to include something as a sub package, for example, UI5 web components, I can also say in UI5 web components, you have this dist, and then you can say the button that's also the sub addressing is something what you can do to point to a module specifically inside the NPM package if you want to have a sub package of it. And that's the normal way how this NPM dependencies are expressed here in these imports in that way. And if you just want to have the default export from an NPM package, then you just type the name of the NPM package, and then you get the default export, which is in the package JSON, either the main or the modules. There you have then either pointing to index.js or index MJS or whatever, and that's the thing what happens there out of the box. The UI5 tooling modules is also aware to look that up. With that, thank you for your interest. Thank you for staying longer with us. 5 minutes overdue is not that bad.